All right, it's showtime. Hello again to our world-class viewers across the globe, and welcome back to the U.S. edition of World Class Community Week. I'm the 2017 U.S. World Class Bartender of the Year, Chris Cardone, subbing for Lauren Moda as the guest host and coming at you from New York. And I'm so excited to be hosting and presenting and participating in this upcoming presentation known as Bar Meets Kitchen. Over the past 2 decades, the relationship between the quote-unquote back and front of house has begun to blend more and more together. And today it's a seamless, symbiotic relationship where food and cocktails and those of us who prepare and execute them work together to enhance our guest relationships and meals more than ever before. We've brought together a group of knowledgeable industry vets that will share their stories and experiences in both the front and the back of house, and how and why they've all created and carved their paths the way they have. First, because of the increase in interest over the past months in baking, Christina Mercado will lead us in an incredible lesson on how to bake bread from scratch. We're going to hear from Moriarty, the chef in residence for Diageo Reserve, who will showcase 2 amazing desserts, one inspired by Johnny Walker Black and the other by Kettle One. Then Abalos will be demonstrating some knife skills, including some tips on manicuring garnishes. Then our panel of world-class alumni and former pastry chefs and a chef in residence will all get together for a hopefully not too heated panel discussion about the similarities and differences between back and front of house, discussion on food pairing, and so much more. Take us away, Christina.
Going into, the beginning, mise en place, the cinnamon raisin bread, why I chose it, the rum zacapa, the aromas you immediately get are raisin. So I wanted to do this cinnamon raisin bread, both because it's fun and easy. Using my raisins with rum zacapa, it's going to add a nice little layer of flavor to it. And this method is really easy to make at home. It's the straight method. So everything you saw there in the beginning of the video all gets mixed together at once. And this is great for at-home baking because it's not going to take a lot of time. It all goes into the KitchenAid together, and we set it for a certain amount of time for both mixing and fermenting. Essentially what we're looking for is just a smooth dough with all the ingredients. I can't stress enough just making sure everything's pre-measured, because this is the straight method. You don't want to start mixing and realize that you forgot to get your butter, you forgot to pick an egg. Once everything gets together, the yeast is already going to start breaking down the flour, and so we want things to go smoothly. Once the dough is made, you're going to put it in a greased bowl. Please make sure you grease your bowl, because what happens is it's start going to grow and the bubbles are going to lift the dough. But what happens if you didn't grease it, it's going to stick to the bowl, and when you try and take it out, you're going to take all that work that the yeast did and you're going to smash it back together. So you see I lightly buttered that bowl first, and then I threw the dough into the bowl. Now we're just going to let it sit, and it sits for about an hour to an hour and a half, and that's when the yeast is really going to get to work in making the air that's going to make it a nice light dough. And while that happens, then we make the filling. So I have brown sugar, cane sugar, cinnamon, and a little bit of flour. That's going to cause the swirl inside of the bread. And we want to make sure we also have the flour, because what happens a lot of times when you have a filled bread that's rolled, the laminated layers will separate. So by adding the flour, it gives it more structure and protein to help the binding to keep those swirls tight for when the dough is baked. And then I also have an egg wash layer. You can use butter as well, but I found that using egg instead of butter in this layer helps to keep those binding elements together and make them strong. So here you see the dough has already risen a little bit from when we first put it into the bowl, and so now it's sitting there. This dough in particular took about an hour and a half, and just as the time goes, it's going to rise slower and slower and slower, but you'll notice at the end it should take about the same size as the bowl that I put it into. At the same time, the raisins there, we've drained out the zacapa, and I've used that zacapa in another cocktail. And there we go. We have the dough ready to go. One of the tips that comes with rolling out a dough, particularly this is a pan, it's a 9x5 pan. So I want to make sure my dough is ready to go when it's rolled out, and I don't have to cut anything. I don't want any waste. So what I do is I actually measure out on my table the width and the length that I have to roll this dough. And then I begin to oil. So I'll mark those lines with tape. That way when I'm rolling out, I know where not to pass and if I've gone too far. So then I oil down my table, and we're going to roll out the dough. I don't use flour because I don't want the dough to absorb any more flour. I don't want it to become very dry. So by oiling it down, it creates the same purpose that my dough won't stick to the pan or to the rolling pin, and I'm also not going to be affecting the structure of the dough itself. So rolling it out, and you can see it's not contracting again, it's rolling out nicely. That means it's ready to be rolled. If you see that it's kind of pulling back on itself, you want to stop, let it rest for a little bit longer, make sure those protein structures are relaxed enough. And there you see, rolled it straight within those 2 lines that I set on the table. Now we're going to egg wash the bread, and this is where we're going to start to set those swirls in motion. So take the egg wash and just paint it. I don't want to oversaturate the dough either. That can also cause it to separate. Just a light brushing, because the whole purpose of the egg wash is to help bind the sugar flour mixture that we have going on here. And it may seem like a lot, but when it bakes in, it's the perfect amount of cinnamon. We want to make sure you get that bright spice mixture in there. And then the zacapa soaked raisins. I will admit I probably ate a couple of these during the process. They're so great. The flavor is wonderful. It's so juicy and vibrant. But you just sprinkle them out and then import. You see there on the right, there's about 1.5 inches that's left empty. You don't want to cover that because as you see when we're rolling, that last piece is left to seal the bread. Push in the sides and then we fit it neatly into the pan. And then we're going to cover it again, this time for the second leavening. This time it's all going to rise together, and this is right before baking. Just like we grease the pan, you also want to make sure you grease the plastic wrap or anything you're using to cover the bread. Again, because if it gets stuck when you go to pull that off, it's going to ruin all the work that you just did. So I lightly oil that with a neutral oil. I tend to use avocado oil at home. It doesn't have much flavor, and it works smoothly. That's it. I want to say this entire process from start to finish is probably actual working time, no more than 30 minutes. It's a really quick process. The longest time you're waiting for is really just the time when it's leavening. As you can see now, you want it to rise about 1 inch to 1.5 inches above the top of the bread pan. That's what's happening there. And then the plastic wrap comes cleanly off. That's from the oiled plastic, and then we throw it in the oven. And now the oven did all the work for us. If it does start to get too brown, I recommend checking it after the first 20 minutes, and you can always put aluminum foil over it so it continues baking. A great way to check if you're not familiar with a lot of bread baking is just to make sure it's between 190 and 200 degrees when you take it out of the oven. That will ensure that the center is ready. And then when I take it out of the oven, I really love just brushing it with butter. It's not required, but it makes it shiny and it adds a great taste to it, especially when you use a nice clean fresh butter on top. Slice, toast, and more butter inside. And there you go. That's probably my breakfast for about a week after I make every loaf. I actually had some this morning. There you go.
That's amazing.
And
Christina.
there's the recipe. Thank you. As you see, the recipe is all weighed out in grams. I do really stress weighing out your ingredients. A lot of times when we bake, if we're going by the cup, our cup, my cup, your cup, it could all be different by how we scoop it, if we level it. So by having a scale and weighing out your ingredients, it just helps with consistency. It looks like a lot of ingredients, but like I showed you in the video, it's really straightforward and easy to make at home. So I encourage anybody to try it. And if you have questions, definitely let me know.
Well, now we all know what we're going to be doing this weekend, but you didn't stop there, right? You also created a cocktail to pair with this too. So can you tell us about that a little bit?
I did. So I created Extraordinary Toast, and a lot of it comes from I worked in restaurants a long time and making fresh breads for the restaurant program. And a lot of times you're going to have those odds and ends, specifically the ends of the bread that go stale and you don't use them. And so I wanted to think of a different way to use it. And so I used actually the odds and ends of the cinnamon raisin bread that I didn't toast, not from those nice slices, kind of the butts of the bread. And I decided to make 2 different ingredients with it. The first was a syrup. So I soaked the bread in really just water for about 6 hours till it really wasn't recognizable as bread anymore. I threw it in a blender and then I strained it through 2 sieves, 1 sieve and 1 coffee filter until I got as much liquid as I could out without the bread particles themselves. And then the second one, I steeped it in milk. For this one in particular, I used an almond milk because I wanted some more nuttiness. So for the water-based one, I turned that into a simple syrup. And when I made the simple syrup, it was this really incredible end result because I got the yeast and sweetness from the bread, but I didn't get a lot of the spice. As opposed to when I then used the almond milk to create the caramel, I got a lot more of the spice and even the raisin notes in there as it was in as it was with the fatty ingredients. And so what I did is I painted the glass with the caramel, and then I used the simple syrup in making this really variety on an old-fashioned variation. And all these recipes will definitely be provided for everyone to try at home. So I combined the bullet bourbon and the rum Zacapa Edición Negra because I wanted some of that smokiness to balance the sweet and the spice that I already had in these bread ingredients. Then the cinnamon bread syrup, and then 2 dashes of orange bitters and aromatic bitters to balance it out. And then I said I brushed the caramel in the glass, and then the inside is an Americano coffee sphere. And so essentially it's really a different look at what you saw in the video of my breakfast. It's coffee and cinnamon raisin bread. And I actually have the cocktail here with you guys today. It's what I'm sipping on now. Really simple. And then the little bits of toast also, I threw those in the oven. They probably take 15 minutes at 325, and you thin slices, and you can make the bread for the garnishes as well and sit on top. So altogether, it is an extraordinary toast.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's my kind of cocktail for sure. Simple, balanced, delicious. It's everything you need it to be. And if, again, what I liked about this seminar is that it's a lot of food that we're talking about, desserts and pastry and things of that nature. So it doesn't have specifically to do with just imbibing spirits. But if you are joining us and you are imbibing, please do so responsibly. Now, let me hand it off to Mark over in Ireland to talk about probably my favorite thing in the world, dessert.
Thank you very much, Chris. Christina, that brioche looks absolutely beautiful, I must say. Hello to everyone from the other side of the Atlantic. Delighted to be here. Just to give you a brief intro, my role with Diageo is essentially about bringing bar and kitchen closer together. So this is the perfect seminar to be part of. And I wanted to do something a little different, a little interactive with it. And I was very excited when I heard that both Patrick and Christina not only were world-class bartenders, but had a background in working in kitchens and particularly in pastry. So I just thought brilliant opportunity to tell a little story by both desserts and matching cocktails. I'm sous chef in a 2 Michelin star restaurant where we have our own cocktail program, and usually what happens is we challenge the bar to reflect our food in their drink serves. But I flipped it this way for this piece of the presentation. So I've designed 2 dishes that are reflecting 2 of our Diageo brands, the first of which is Johnnie Walker Black Label. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the dish. It's a little bit of an inspirational piece. You can tell me what you think in the Q&A or in the chat. You can tell me if you think it's crap as well. I don't get too easily offended. And then I'm going to throw first of all to Patrick to describe, I suppose, this is a virtual little tasting menu of how a bar and kitchen can work together. So on the left is my dessert. I have a very simple it's basically like a chocolate tart, and it's in the style of what we do in the restaurant. And what we have is a chocolate pastry case base, nice and thin. And when I'm thinking Johnnie Walker, I think lovely caramelized layers of flavor with spice and seasoning and citrus zest, almost dried citrus zest. They're the things that come to me as a chef. So we've made a little brown sugar custard almost. So we've added some brown sugar into a pot. We've caramelized it off, brought it till it's nice and mahogany. So you're getting towards that lovely bitterness, but it has all those honeyed notes. Always thinking of that Johnnie Walker in the glass. I've split it by adding a little bit of cream and some butter. So we bring it up to the boil and we get basically a lovely brown sugared flavored cream. So all those toasted caramel notes. And what we do is we pour it on a 70% chocolate. So it's quite bitter. But the chocolate I've chosen is a brand we use in the restaurant called Amade. I'm sure Patrick and Christina are familiar with it. It's from Tuscany in Italy. And for me, it's probably the best chocolate in the world. And like the aging process of something like Johnnie Walker Black Label in barrel, it has these layers of complex flavors of dried red fruits through spice into toasted nuts. It's an amazing product. I could go on and on about it. But anyway, I'll get lost. Our cream goes on top, and what we do is it makes almost like a crème with chocolate and custard, and we pour it into our case and we let it set. So we're starting to build all those layers of Johnnie Walker in the glass. And then what I do is I finish it with some candied walnuts. So that sweet toasted nut flavor, which I love in something like Johnnie Walker. We have a little bit of coffee jelly, which is the black little cubes on top there. So that just brings a background hit of bitterness, which for me brings out all those lovely red fruit notes and spices in the chocolate. I'm trying to enhance the chocolate, which is telling the story of the Johnnie Walker Black Label. And then as a pastry chef, or having worked in pastry, I'm always scared of sugar. For me, sugar masks flavor. when it becomes overly sweet. So we're going to push that back. We're going to push the sugar back on our palate by seasoning the tart, which is a little bit of a strange thing to do. So we add some smoked salt, which is from the west of Ireland, harvested from the Atlantic and lightly smoked in hay. And that brings that smoky layer of what's classic in Johnnie Walker Black Label. And a little bit of timut pepper. So I like using pepper both in pastry and in the savory sections. And timut pepper is a very rare pepper from Nepal. And it tastes intensely of grapefruit peel, which brings our citrus peel, which is the last dimension of Johnnie Walker Black Label that I want to express in the dessert. So as you go through and you eat it, you get all those layers of hopefully a delicious dessert using premium product, which is what we try to do, reflecting a premium product such as Johnnie Walker Black Label. And at that point, I get to take a little sit back in my corner of the presentation and throw to Patrick, who's designed this amazing cocktail on our right, which is based off, I threw him this dessert last week, and I haven't asked too many questions, so I'm excited to see what he's come up with.
Awesome. So this cocktail is called Transcendence to the Mean. It was one of my speed round cocktails I did last year at Nationals, and I wanted to do something that kind of complemented and kind of semi-contrasted the tart that you made, Mark. So essentially playing on the flavor profiles of Johnnie Walker, we start with banana, a little bit of Benedictine to give it kind of a herbaceous note, a little bit of a Chard to dry it out. And then of course we have some lemon in there to kind of enhance and brighten the cocktail and kind of play well with that. I think it's a 70% chocolate that we have in the tart to kind of, I like mixing with, or like making lemon curd chocolates. So using like a 75% or 70% chocolate, doing lemon and curd in there, and then doing some kind of pecan crust or something like that is normally what I like playing with. And of course, a little turbinado and a little bit of egg to kind of give it some texture. So this is a dessert cocktail in that it pairs well with the dessert, but it's also a drier style where it's going to kind of balance out the chocolate and not make it too sweet. Like you said, sugar can be overpowering. If you put too much sugar, it can kind of throw everything out of balance between the pairing of the two, the tart and the cocktail.
Absolutely beautiful, Patrick. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I think it's key to note. I know I do a lot of these seminars about the role of chef and bartender before I get on to the second dessert. It can often be either reflecting something in the glass that's not designed to pair, even though you are having them together, or what we'll often do with our bar manager is we'll leave an element out on our dessert or on our dish. So it might have 4 of the 5 flavor senses that it needs, but you might need a little bit of bitterness from something, and that's where our bar team will come in and they'll design a cocktail which offers that bitterness, so it makes sense then when you have them together. And for me, it's going a bit down one of those roads, either reflecting something that are separate entities, or offering a last element to finish a dish, or vice versa, is the key role of the bar and kitchen. Now, without further ado, second dessert, which I've challenged Christina with on the cocktail side, is based on Kettle One. So from a chef's perspective, it can be quite tough when it comes to vodka. So with Kettle One, I've taken the angle of the community focus of the brand. So family-made vodka by the Nolet family for 13 generations in Schiedam. And they're very big on the Hive project, which I've done a lot of work on. So I've taken an Irish sense of that, and I've used a supplier of our restaurant. It's a gentleman called Charlie Terry, who is a family-run farm in County Cork in the south of the country. And here he works with his family for the last few generations in a similar way to the Nolet family to produce dairy cattle for some amazing milk and cream. And he also has hives on the side. So it was perfect to fit into the Kettle One family. And I've done a dessert that reflects him. It's basically a milk tart. So the tart case on the base is actually made from cocoa butter and white chocolate. And what we do is we freeze tart frame, those classic tart molds that you get that you usually bake the pastry in. We freeze them in liquid nitrogen. We turn them upside down and we heat up the mix and pour it over the top. And then what happens is it freezes on the minus 150 degrees Celsius tart case, and we lift it off and we have basically a cocoa butter tart case. It's filled on the base with some toasted candied hazelnuts. So hazelnuts are a very traditional, almost prehistoric ingredient from Ireland, which offers a lovely nuttiness. And we season that with a little bit of olive oil. For me, olive oil is one of those things that pushes sugar back in pastry work, very spicy. And in the same way as creating spirits, you can get so many layers of flavor in different types of olive oil. So we've gone to Tuscany again. I know the Italian thing to many olive oil, which is one of my favorite ingredients in the world. Again, beautiful, beautiful product. And what we do then is we get the milk from Charlie Terry's farm. We put it into a siphon gun. We season it lightly with some salt and sugar. And we put it through a siphon gun and whisk it into the nitrogen. And we get this snow-like texture that turns back to milk when you actually put it in your mouth. And that fills the top of the tart case. We don't want to use anything. So obviously sustainability is one of the big things in Kettle One. So the buttermilk is the byproduct of the milk and cream creation. And we make a sorbet with that, which again goes into the nitrogen. So you get a lovely mouthfeel. It freezes very quickly, doesn't allow ice crystals to form. So we've wasted nothing from the dairy farm. And then we use his honey. And the honey then is just gently warmed. It has all these beautiful lavender, almost like tropical fruit notes from what the bees are harvesting down in the south of Ireland. That's just warmed and poured tableside over the top. And we add a little bit of honeycomb as well on top for texture, because it's all quite soft and quite melting. This actually is a pre-dessert on our menu. So what we've done there is we've told the story of sustainability. We've told the story of a family farm. And we've also told the story of the bees and the hive collection to tie it lovely into Kettle One. So on that note, I'm going to throw to Christina for the reflection in the glass with a beautiful cocktail.
Thank you. That I would love to try that dessert one day. So the cocktail that I paired with it, I wanted to do something that played really well with the different layers of milk that I saw in the dessert. And so I started with the Kettle One for its just beautiful silkiness, and it has already that natural light citrus notes and honeyed. And then I paired it with a honey Tanqueray 10, where I mixed a raw Himalayan honey with the Tanqueray 10 and then strained it. And so it pretty much just softened the citrus enough so it blended really well with the Kettle One in this almost of a Vesper variation, where I brought in then the Palo Cortado sherry, which the one in particular I chose has a really nice nutty, almost almond note to it, while still keeping this herbaceous citrus note as well. So it blended with everything together. Only a little bit of lemon zest. I particularly cut it in half an inch piece, because I didn't want it to overtake the flavor of the cocktail itself. And then on the outside of the glass, I put in olive oil caramel, and then finished making that caramel then into a powder, so that when you sip the cocktail, it immediately turned back into that liquid on your lips and then blended with the cocktail. So you got this almost sweet brine on your lips as you're going into the smooth creaminess of the cocktail. And it resulted in this aromatic, floral, and beautifully clean yet still dry martini. And then when you drink it with something creamy, I paired it with a custard when I was home playing with the ingredients. The custard will accentuate the cocktail, and then vice versa. It kind of plays back and forth really well with any milk products. So it's really nice and dry, so it pairs really well with the dessert, but it's also something that would go great just to have a cocktail on your own at the end of a meal.
Beautiful. Hope we can do that sometime when we're back over in the States. Looking forward to the chat at the end. I'll throw back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Mark. The desserts, the cocktails, everything was amazing. I'm getting super hungry, and it's not good because it's around dinner time, and I don't want to spoil that. But now we're going to sort of switch a little bit on our direction, and we're going to talk about some knife skills with Patrick. He's also going to talk about some garnishing techniques. So, Patrick, tell us what we can do to sharpen our blades.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about knife skills. So this first video here is going to talk about the three tools we use the most behind the bar as far as knives. So you have the three knives we have that are going to be set up here on the board. You have your paring knife, you have a utility knife, and you have a chef knife. Me personally, I like using the middle knife more. That's the utility knife that I use the most behind the bar. But the paring knife is something that we use pretty heavily as well behind the bar. One thing about knives, you got to keep them sharp. So making sure we have a stone available or some kind of honing steel available. So this one's a quick demo on how to sharpen your knife. There were two sides of the honing steel, the stone. So you have the white side, which is a fine grain, and then you have the red side, which is a little bit rougher grain. Rougher grain is to get more of a grind on there. If you're just doing a quick sharpening, you use the finer grain so you don't hurt your burr too much. As you can see on the screen right now, we have the honing steel. So essentially that's how you hone. Essentially honing is what you're doing is you're sharpening the blade and you're straightening the metal again. Because sometimes the metal of the burr is a straight piece, but then it starts folding over a little bit as you cut. So essentially by using the honing steel, you're making it straight again. Then we're going into cutting, so you can kind of see the grip. Really important to keep your fingers tucked. So you have your thumb and your pinky kind of tucked behind your front fingers. You kind of see how I have my knife against my nails in a straight line. That's how you kind of keep it straight. And you just cut with your nails to make sure you're not going to cut your fingers off, because that's bad. Don't do that. But really important you have the grip, so you kind of see how I have the kind of the grip going in here. Cutting down a pineapple. I just kind of showed you how to level pineapple. It's always important to work on leveled surfaces. So anytime you're using pineapple or any kind of citrus or doing a melon, it's always important to cut off the ends. Make sure you have a flat surface and then kind of work your way down. You can kind of see here, I'm kind of demoing how to do a pineapple. So again, see how I have the grip on my hand, pay attention to the hand, trim it up, and then it's good to go. Bell peppers are really hard to cut. Again, making sure you're doing a flat surface. So you're just kind of get straight off front edges. Again, you're gonna do a strip down the middle, like I'm doing there. You're gonna flatten it out and watch your fingers as you're doing this. You're gonna kind of work your way to get all the membrane out. Of course, doing this when you kind of jalapeno is important because if you don't want heat, kind of take the membrane out. And there you have the bell pepper. You kind of see cut in half, and then real quick, I'm gonna do a quick slice on this guy. Kind of see, watch my fingers again, see the grip, and then you're gonna just do a quick slicing. Again, it's important to kind of keep the tip of your blade on your cutting board, and then just kind of let the blade do the work. If you're having to put too much effort into it, your blade's not sharp, you need to go back and sharpen it because your blade should just cut through that pretty easily. We have an apple here, again, just kind of going into an apple fan garnish. Again, we're gonna cut it straight across. Watch your fingers. When you're doing an apple fan, it's really important to do nice thin strips next to each other so you can kind of see I'm doing it real close. Letting the knife do this work. Really important, you should have a sharp knife. From there, you're gonna shingle them together, like I'm doing there. And they should stick to each other, and then you can do it just like that and do a pick through it. And there you have a nice apple fan garnish working for that one. So there you go on that one. And always make sure you clean your board after you're done. Watch your knife blade. Now we're talking about limes. So this is how to cut a proper lime wedge. This is something I'd cover when we're doing bar consulting. Of course, garnish is all about eye appeal. So if you're paying $15 for a cocktail, it's really important that your garnish represents that $15 that you're paying for it. And the one thing I see a lot of bartenders as a consultant doing is cutting limes wrong. So it's really important to cut it the way I'm doing it. Cut in half, put the strip in the middle, and then you're going to cut it right in the middle of that half. So you're going to do a quarter, so you can see the wedges are actually pretty even and perfect. If you don't do it this way, you're going to have a misproportioned size wedges. We're going into garnishing now. So as you guys know, this is a white giller. That's another one of our bartender toolkit arsenals. I have it in my knife kit in any competition, anywhere I go. With manicuring pills, it's really important to make sure it's essentially you're cutting, making it look nice. So essentially taking off all the rough edges, using the knife to get all those rough edges off, making them nice and square. And then I just made a flag right there on that cocktail, which is pretty common cocktail garnish. The next one we're going into is going to be the starburst. So same kind of concept. You're going to take your peel, you're going to work it, you're going to straighten it out. Like I just said there, again, always manicure your peels. You're going to straighten it out a little bit. Like I said there, you can also use some scissors. I've seen a lot of people use specialty scissors if you want to do some kind of swirl technique and stuff on the edges. But to make the starburst, like I said, you're just going to do a nice cut on each side so it attaches to each other, and then you're going to make some cuts like I'm doing there on the edges. So it'll flare out as you roll it, and then you're going to do a nice one in the center. You're going to attach where those two pieces are, and then you're going to have a nice starburst that you can put on the over your glass. So another nice citrus garnish you can work with. Just going to put it straight on the glass there. And there you have that one. And then the last but not least, after this video, we're going to talk a little bit about how to store knives. So it's really important that you take care of your blades. Like I said, this is your most important tool behind the bar. When you're cleaning your knife, make sure the blade is not facing your hand, because if it's a sharp enough knife, it's going to cut through whatever it is and straight into your palm. You don't want that to happen. So always use the back of your knife. When you're cleaning, work from the top down to the bottom like I did there. And then they make these nice knife cases like I just showed there, which is a plastic thing that you can put your knife in to protect the blade and just slide into your case like that. Or if you have a nice kit, like a nice knife case like I have there, just slide into your knife case and you're good to go. And that's Knife Skills 101.
Very cool, Patrick. I remember competing in World Class during the years that I was competing, and it was really, really hard to find any, if any, information on garnish, manicuring, prepping, creative ways other than just using Instagram. So thank you for that. That was really, really helpful. All right, now let's talk a little World Class competition. So last year, both Christina and Patrick competed in the U.S. World Class National Finals. And one of the challenges was called the Great Kentucky Bake-Off, where they were tasked to create a cocktail inspired by Kentucky's most famous desserts. Christina, and then maybe Patrick could help out. Both of you could maybe briefly tell us a little bit about what you came up with and why you came up with it.
Sure. So this first cocktail here, it's called Foundation and Form. It was inspired by a dessert called chess pie. It's a southern dessert. It was really focused in Kentucky. And what I learned when researching this pie is that it really started with kind of the basic of pastry ingredients. It just has eggs, flour, sugar, cream, butter, and that's about it. Some recipes had a little bit of cornmeal in there. So a lot of the flavor was just derived from those natural ingredients, from the milk and the sugar and the custard. That's created with those. So I wanted to break that down in cocktail form. So essentially I took the corn that would be used in a cornmeal and I steeped that to make a corn crème anglaise. So essentially I made a custard base for my cocktail. And then I turned this into a flip by just adding the egg white, bullet bourbon, and soda water because I wanted to make it light. As we keep discussing with dessert cocktails, one of the things that happens too often is that it's too sweet, too heavy, too viscous. So by adding the soda water and making it light, it carried those flavors with that little bit of salt and kept it light on the tongue. It's sweet and still had that essence of chess pie, which is what I really wanted to get across. And then instead of a pie crust, I created a tuile really thin in the shape of Kentucky to finish the cocktail at the end. So pretty straightforward, using, again, as you see in the recipe, corn kernels, buttermilk, egg yolk, vanilla bean, all the ingredients that you'd find in the pie, just making it into a different form for the cocktail, which is why the name of the cocktail is actually Foundation and Form, the foundation of the pie changing its form.
My cocktail was called Matters Perspective. So essentially what I did is I took a derby pie and turned it into cocktail form. And this one I started with a bullet bourbon. I did a pecan infusion in it. I did a lot of infusions on this one because I wanted to try and make a simple 3-4 ingredient cocktail that tasted delicious. So when infusing pecans, it's always important to, or it's very hard to mix with it because they're very tannic. So you got to do it real quick. If you overdo it, then it gets too tannic and it's just a bone dry cocktail. And then bullet was a good medium for that. So derby pie has pecans in it, has chocolate, has butter. I think a cookie and a pie crust essentially is what it is. I wanted to butter fat wash something, so it made sense to do the Angostura. So I wanted that nice spice component to come through in this Manhattan riff. And I butter fat washed some Angostura bitters, which came out really well, really delicious. It's probably going to be keep in my pocket and use it for later. And then we did a cacao nib infused vermouth, which is something we've been playing with as well. 45 grams of cacao nibs to a bottle of Coqui Torino. Really great by itself, even with no cocktail base, but bringing all the flavor profiles of a derby pie into a stirred Manhattan riff with the pecan, the chocolate, and the butter kind of playing into it. And then I did a pastry crust garnish. So I did a sweet pastry dough. I did a little bit of leftover pecans and made essentially a strudel on top, and then did some Angostura wash on top. And I also paired this cocktail with a truffle that I made with a vanilla cream filling, pastry crust shell, and a little bit of pecan marzipan that I put in it, and then a 75% chocolate shell on that one.
That's incredible. So you can see the level of cocktail knowledge and execution by these two national finalists for sure. Before we get to the Q&A, I just want to quickly touch on something that I'm passionate about. After almost about 20 years in this business, a few weeks from now will be 20 years, I've learned a lot about two topics that I want to briefly discuss. And I think they kind of are related, which is the synergy of your cocktail program in your kitchen. So the first thing, I think it's so important to make sure that the menu that you're creating as a bartender has some synergy with the kitchen in some way. There's nothing weirder than going to a restaurant that has one style of food and then the cocktails are a completely other style and they don't mesh. So they have to have some symbiotic relationship. They can contrast, they can be similar, but they have to in some way work with the food menu. And then the best thing to do to create that is to communicate with both your executive chef and your pastry chef. Both of them have different palates. They both have different views on their menu. So you sit down with both of them, you talk about where they're going with the program, and then you talk to them about what you want to do with the program. Now, there's two reasons for this. Is that one, if you live in an area like I do in New York, there's so much seasonality to be celebrated that it really gives you an opportunity to work with what's fresh. And so whatever the chef's bringing in, whatever the pastry chefs are bringing in, or whatever you're deciding to bring in, you can all work together to use those ingredients in a really, really beautiful relationship. The other part of it is that it helps with sustainability, which is such a hot topic right now with the world and the bar business. So it's important in two ways. One is that by using whatever another person is going to normally throw out. You know that expression, one man's treasure is another man's trash, or vice versa. It's really important to try to figure out what part of the ingredients the chef, the pastry chef, or you would throw out, and then someone else could use that in some way. So there's so many different opportunities and avenues to discuss this, and we'll talk about this in the Q&A in a minute, but there's so many avenues and opportunities to really go wasteless and really go from, to take the whole ingredient and use every single part. And we're seeing more and more of that as a trend in the bar business. So let's bring Mark back into the situation. Mark, all bartenders use the Flavor Bible. It's like their Bible, right, for flavor pairings. Do you have any recommendations beyond that book for learning about flavor pairing and food pairing?
Yeah, we look a lot at classic cuisine. So the style of cooking we do and have done is modernizing classics. So we'll actually often travel, because we're lucky enough, to France, but we would a lot of the time go through a lot of the older books. So looking at cooking from the 1920s through to the 1980s, or even before that, and find really classic dishes, but then what we do is we lighten them, refine them, and bring them into the modern age. And for two reasons, we feel that recipes that have stood the test of time are doing that because they're quality. Often I fear when I'm tasting something that I have never tried before, because the vast majority of the time there's a reason I've never tasted it before, because it's not that good. And then in terms of books, do you know what? I'm actually of that kind of generation now where I follow chefs and bartenders, and I follow them for their style, generally because they're creating the type of food and drink that I want to create. So I'll have a style that I'll go down. I'm not into the Noma, the fermentation thing, maybe because I haven't trained extensively in it, but it's just not my style. And what I'll do is I'll take a lot of inspiration from other chefs. I eat out a lot, whatever about books or flavor manuals. For me, just going out and trying things is the best way to improve myself, to taste, to see the top level of bars or restaurants, and have that benchmark in my head of, okay, this is the best in the world. So remember that and try to replicate that in my own creations. That's the best way of coming up with flavors for me, more so than any books or anything like that.
For sure. Also, the opportunity for us to be on Community Week this whole week and learn about all sorts of flavors. I was watching the earlier presentation, and we got an opportunity to watch Lorena cook in her kitchen. And so you can learn that way too. So there's a lot of opportunities to learn for sure. All right, Patrick, what skills do you think are most transferable between back of house and front of house?
Of course, knife skills are number one thing that you can bring from front of back of house. The other one is timing is really important, especially when you're working online. I think you can kind of get used to how to time out a round is really important as a bartender. Another thing is mise en place is really important, especially in a kitchen. Having everything ready to go is really important during a busy bar shift to make sure you have all your garnish and everything ready and prepped and set on your station. Were probably three of the biggest things that I brought from back of house to front of house.
That's a really good point, thinking about mise en place and how they're so related, right? It's funny because you brought up the concept of timing. That's such a big part of bartending and understanding how to mix your ingredients and when to shake and when to stir. And when I'm cooking at my house, I never know how to time everything out. It's always I'm like burning this and I'm like, oh no, what do I do about this? And I start freaking out. So it's definitely a skill that's transferable for sure.
Yeah,
all right, Christina, we've had some really good questions come in, so I'm going to ask you a kind of a double layer. So first, what pastry techniques have you found useful behind the bar, and how do they transform the spirits? And then also, do you have any tips for a kitchen that doesn't prove bread well? Can you go in an oven as a set temp? So if you could hit both of those.
Okay, so the first would be pastry techniques. I definitely think a lot of what I use behind the bar that I started in the kitchen are primarily doing infusions with syrups versus water versus fats, doing creams, foams, emulsions. Those are all techniques I learned doing desserts, particularly when I worked in hotels for a long time, so it was all plated desserts. And I think a great example was in Mark's Desserts. You see different techniques for different textures and different elements, and they each bring different flavors to the forefront. So studying how a fat in the form of a whipped cream versus fat when you're doing a heated emulsion will give you different flavors. And so I think those techniques have helped me the most behind the bar, because when I use, for example, a strawberry, I already have at the forefront 5 different ways I can try and extract flavor. And I think that's a great skill for people just to practice in general. And the question was about bread and proofing, I believe.
Yeah, well, if you don't have, if your kitchen doesn't proof bread well.
Yeah. So I will give the example, I guess, for my home kitchen. I live in an apartment where you can't have gas stove, so I have everything's electric. It's not the ideal environment for proofing bread. So a lot of what I do to mitigate temperature is a lot of times I'll turn on the stovetops to warm up the kitchen, or I'll turn on the oven to create a heated environment. I've also done that I actually turn on the oven for a set amount of time, then I'll shut it off, cool it down, and put a pan with water in there so it creates this moisture inside, which is a really nice environment. I think playing with temperature as best we can with different tools is the easier way to do it. There is no easy one size fits all. It's using what you have. I've also put pots of water on the stove on a low temperature because that keeps my kitchen humid and then creates another good environment for proofing. Using different tricks and tips like that, depending on the space you have available, I think would be the best way to do that.
Very cool. So questions are literally pouring in right now. So Mark, I'm going to double up on you now. So the first question is, obviously we're all in some form of quarantine currently. So do you have any advice on how to use common ingredients that most, if not all of us, have in our houses or our pantries on a regular basis? And then the second part of that question is, what would you recommend to people who don't have access to a kitchen in their establishment? What are culinary techniques that can still be used even if you're just strictly a bar with no culinary or kitchen area to use?
Yeah, great questions. First one, it's actually nicely timed because the show that I'm airing at the moment here in Ireland is based on that cooking during quarantine, where people have to use very common household ingredients to make food. Actually, it's quite interesting. I'll give you an example. I was making a tart here the other day, basically because I'd run out of Instagram content and I needed something to put up. And I was doing a caramel custard tart. And I had no fancy equipment, so I had a tart case and that was it. I had to make the pastry by hand, and we as chefs, and I imagine bartenders as well, get very used to having it easier with top equipment and having our bar in front of us. So I put it together anyway. The tart case was maybe a little bit thick if it was in the restaurant. Made the custard, lovely eggs went in, and it was a caramel base. I was using a little bit as a Kappa rum actually, but I wanted to add an extra dimension. But not using any fancy ingredients. And one thing I've learned recently is caramel and chocolate is incredibly enhanced by the use of soy sauce. And soy sauce is one of those ingredients that everyone just has in their kitchen. And I use it to make stews and meat taste better or taste more meatier and give it seasoning and umami. So I use a little bit of soy sauce in the custard. And my family were looking at me going, what are you doing? But what it does is, like I said, it pushes back the sugar. It brings an umami layer. So you're not actually tasting soy sauce, but it just makes the caramel notes in the caramel custard and the zacapa, it brings them to the fore more, and it makes it taste just more of itself. So that was just a little example from learning at home of how I was, I suppose, trying to produce restaurant quality food or top end bar drinks at home. And then the second question, in terms of technique and equipment, I always think back to when I used to do pop-ups where we didn't have fancy equipment. We had to make it happen out of our home. This is where I started my business first. And I was drawn back to old ways of preserving food, because when you think about it, 100 years ago, they didn't have fancy equipment. They didn't even have refrigeration. What they used to do is they used to manipulate ingredients with salt and sugar to get different results. And it comes back to an example of what we do in the restaurant is we'll get bergamot in every year at a certain time, and it comes in one bulk because the season is tiny. And what we'll do is we'll take a few and we'll juice them fresh. We'll take a little bit of the zest and we'll make a condiment out of that to preserve it with sugar and vanilla. And then we salt the rest. So we use salt, pack it down, leave it for about 3 weeks. It makes it go intensely bitter. But what we were doing then was we couldn't figure out a way to use it in the kitchen. It was too bitter and too intense. But the bar took it and they juiced it, and they had this incredible salted bergamot syrup. It went like a syrupy texture. And they used it in a serve with Don Julio, which was, again, tying into I suppose, the style that goes with a tequila like that. No waste. And it was, I suppose, us not being able to do anything in the kitchen. The bar were able to come in and say, you know what, we don't throw that in the bin. We have a perfect use for that. And it was going back to those old ways of of manipulating ingredients before there was any special equipment. If we look back, there's plenty of literature and plenty of stuff on Google that I go to, and you find these amazing ideas and recipes from almost prehistoric medieval times that you can turn into modern amazing recipes.
Awesome. I can't imagine how many bartenders are about to go make soy sauce cocktails. Thanks for all right. So the next question is, Patrick, I personally, when I make cocktails, one of my favorite things is trying to figure out which spirit I should use when I'm pairing it with a dish. Do you have any really strong preferences towards certain spirits, or are you kind of like me where you just start and see where it takes you?
So I'm kind of like you. I kind of start and see where it takes me. Generally, if I'm building a cocktail, I'll start with the concept and figure out what medium I want my base spirit to be, or what flavor profiles I'm looking for. This is generally where I start building a cocktail, and then I start like with flavor wheel style, where I start with the base spirit, and then I start figuring out flavor profiles I want to pull out of it, and then start going into secondary spirits and secondary profiles to round out the whole cocktail build experience.
Very cool.
Spirits first, or it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on what I'm trying to accomplish for the cocktail.
Sometimes working with a chef can be a little intimidating. I know that there's been certain chefs in my career when I've started working as a bar manager, or had some sort of creative control on the cocktail menu, and I've been like really nervous if I just came right away to go in and talk to that executive chef or that pastry chef, to walk in there and just say, "Hey, I'm Chris, and this is what I'm doing." So, do you have any recommendations, having been both front and back, on how to approach that situation?
Have a clear picture in your mind what your goal from the conversation is. A lot of the times, particularly if this is at work, we all have little time as it is. So go in and say, this is my plan. This is what I want to work with. I've noticed you're using X, Y, and Z on the menu. I would like to use it in the bar. Is there something we can cross-utilize together? And kind of go in with a plan to collaborate. And that kind of just opens up the dialogue to that feeling that you want to work with them, as opposed to you just trying to either give them more work or asking them to do things. A lot of the times I know it can be kind of scary to say, oh, I need syrups made, I need to go into the kitchen to take up space, and that's where a lot of the debate can happen sometimes. So come in with a definite plan. This is where I would like some help, and know ways that you can help each other. If you're going to be using a syrup at the bar that maybe they want to use in the kitchen, you can prep for each other and see ways to work together. I think that's the best way. Just walk in with a spirit of collaboration, and most of the time there shouldn't be any challenges with your chefs.
Very cool. Mark, another question for you. How'd you get your start with Diageo and the World Class program?
I came on board, was it 2018? So I've been working for 12 years in kitchens. We've 2 Michelin stars now. I suppose I got my break in 2015. I won the San Pellegrino World Young Chef of the Year, and on the back of that, I brought my restaurant on tour around the world for a year and cooked in 14 different cities over 12 months. And Diageo asked me to come on board because I suppose my style of food is very much about telling the story of Ireland initially and places through food. So my role then with World Class is, like we have here, essentially been able to tell the story of the Diageo brands through food. So I have a saying when I'm here with everyone is, not everyone often drinks, and within that, not everyone might drink spirits, but everyone eats food every day. So it's a great medium of telling stories and showcasing the quality and the history of a lot of the brands in the portfolio.
Cool. All right. So this could get heated. I'm not sure where this is going to go. But Patrick, during your video, you cut the limes, but you left the edge of the pith. And a lot of people are trained to cut that edge off. Where do you stand on it? And Christina, Mark, by any means, let's all throw it in there. Where do you stand on cleaning that pith off?
I think there should be a small amount of pith, not a lot. I probably could have gone a little bit further on the cut that I did in the video as I was watching it again. But I think there needs to be a little bit just to hold the membrane, the actual lime membrane in place when you're squeezing it.
Christina, are you with Patrick or are you against Patrick?
Not totally against, but I do cut the entire pith off, and I think for me it's just more of an aesthetic. I like that clean green line, but I can understand. I don't want to start a fight, Patrick. I'm sorry, but I understand wanting to keep everything together as best you can.
Mark, as a chef in residence, would you clean it or would you keep it on?
I'm with Christina. I'd probably clean it and then take it off and cut it into perfect diamonds or something. I've got madness with shapes.
Very cool. I remember one of the first cocktail bars I worked at with under Julie Reiner. I get yelled at because I forgot to, when I was cleaning the lemons, to take the seeds out, and so I got a stern talking to about that one. It was something else. Okay, next question. How would you approach young bartenders on showing them the importance of the culinary world and its implementation to the bar world? That is, the bar scene is just more than just drinks. So, Christina, we'll start off with you. How do you feel about that?
For me, it's one world. It's an experience. It's a food and beverage experience, everything together. So I think it's important to remind people, particularly if you work in a bar that has food. Not all bars have food, but food can accentuate cocktails, and cocktails can accentuate food. That was something that Mark definitely spoke about really well. And so reminding them that it's great to keep those lines of communication open, get to know your kitchen team well, and speak about how you can each help elevate each other to create this experience for a guest, because it's the holistic experience that's going to bring people back to our bars and back to our restaurants. So get to know both sides as best you can. Herbs work in both worlds. Sugar works in both worlds. We use the same ingredients at the end of the day. So I think it's important to work together.
Patrick?
So generally, as a consultant, I've worked with a lot of different bartenders. So trying to get them to, when we go in to do a training program, we generally do a tasting of the entire program, or all the juices and everything. And we do a tasting of fresh juice versus 1 day versus 3 day versus 5 day juice. So they can kind of understand how flavor profiles and how it kind of changes. I think is one way to kind of get more experience in the culinary world. The one thing I always recommend them doing is going into the kitchen, talking to the chef a little bit. Sometimes it can be hard to talk to a chef, which nowadays it's not as hard to talk to a chef. I know you asked that question earlier. Generally approaching them, they're willing to teach you if you ask questions. And I think that's really important, is to ask questions, go into the walk-in. If there's something you don't see, ask them a question about it. If you see some kind of herb they don't, touch it, smell it, and then ask the chef what it is and kind of find out about it. I think it's a good way to kind of start connecting what happens in culinary world and bring it behind the bar, and making it how they both cross-utilize.
Mark, do you agree, or do you think?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's changed a lot in the last 5 or 6 years, particularly as we've seen cocktail culture, definitely here in Europe and in Ireland particularly, taking almost over the wine section. We keep the team in the restaurant. There's only 15 of us, and it's very much everyone has a role that's key to the performance of not only the restaurant, but the customer's experience and the business. So no matter from commie chef right down to starting on the floor, everyone's involved in the meetings. We make sure everyone understands how the business works, not only about being creative, but the business side of it as well. And it's very much about, look, our business is pretty much 50% wet-led, 50% food. So they're equally as important. And our customers, and one thing I've noticed massively in the last 5 years, is our customers expect the same thought process and the same level of detail in the cocktails and the drink service as they do on the plates of food. And they expect that they'll be intertwined, and that our bar team will be able to talk about their creations in the same way as the chefs will be able to come down and talk about the dishes. One of the things I've learned in World Class is it's exactly the same. The thought process, the creativity, the passion, the talent, be it behind the bar in the kitchen, is exactly the same, only for the vast majority of it, that you guys, the bartenders, are putting things in glasses and we're putting things on plates. And also an interesting thing I've seen when we talk about the younger, not only the younger people in the team and how they interact with how it works every day, but we're getting younger guests, like where maybe in a 2 Michelin star restaurant before in Ireland you would have had the over 50s. Now you're getting people from the 30 years age bracket and up. And we've seen a massive increase in sales in our aperitifs, because instead of looking at a massive aperitif list of champagnes with years, vintages, non-vintages, French names, we have a list of 3 or 4 cocktails that are nice, casual name, completely described, nice and simple. People go, do you know what? I'm comfortable with this. I get this. I don't have to feel like I have to ask any silly questions. I'm going to go straight in on a cocktail. And it's our first impression in the restaurant now at the level we're at is our bar team landing down with a cocktail, and that's the first thing the guest's tasting. It's not actually the food anymore, which I suppose showcases how important it is.
Sure, you're speaking to my heart. I'm the first to scream about the 13 ingredient cocktail. Simple, delicious, balanced. That's what you want.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep this going. I got a couple more minutes and I got a couple more questions. So Patrick, after watching your amazing knife skills, somebody actually asked if there's more video of you doing knife skills presentations anywhere that we can find them.
Not yet, but I think I'm probably going to have to do a few more now. So we'll be looking out for those.
Okay, very cool. Christina, how can you better train your palate? Pastry chefs have the best palates in the restaurant. So how do you better train it?
Definitely by tasting and smelling on a regular basis, even things that you think you know already. For example, I always use the example of cinnamon when talking to my bar team. We all think we know what cinnamon tastes and smells like, but a lot of times we can forget the nuances of it. Some of the floral varieties, what type of cinnamon you have, it changes. So consistently tasting and smelling things on a regular basis, just taking note of when you're eating every day at home, even just your regular breakfast, lunch, and dinner, pay attention to those notes and really take a moment to pause and think about what you're eating. I think just makes us better observers, and through observation, that's how we train our palate, by taking mental notes of what things smell and taste like on a regular basis.
Like working out, right? It's just a muscle and it just takes more time.
Exactly.
The more you use it, the more strength you have. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Mark, I love this question. You don't get to ask a chef in residence this question very often. What have you taken back to the kitchen that you've learned from World Class in the cocktail world?
Great question. I have one that stands out. It's been on the restaurant menu ever since. I was at World Class. My first one was Berlin. There was an amazing cocktail by Daniel Warren, the UK representative in the Zacapa Challenge, where he had to create a digestif. And he did an extraction from globe artichoke, which he worked out from a science perspective was a natural digestif, created this. I stood there and I got shivers. It was mind-blowing. So what we did was we took it back to the restaurant, the concept of it, and we were serving pigeon at the time as the last meat course before the dessert. So we designed basically a pigeon tea using all the bones and the carcasses of the pigeon, infused it with loads of spice, loads of juniper, loads of herbs, and we went tableside, and we were actually using one of the single malt scotches from Scotland at the time. And we poured a tiny bit in the glass when the customers were just finishing their main course to have a taste of, I won't name the single malt scotch, and it was a tiny taste. And then what we did is we came tableside with a little teapot with our pigeon tea, infused it with some rosemary and more juniper berries, and had it lightly smoking, and we poured it into the same glass, so it just got the very last entrails of the essence and scent from the scotch. And that became their natural digestif to finish the savory part of the menu and move into the pre-dessert and dessert. And that was taken from what I saw at one of the World Class Challenges 2 years ago.
Amazing. Well, it seems like our time is up here. I'm your host, Chris Cardone. Thank you to everyone around the world for tuning in and watching. Thank you to Christina and Mark and Patrick for your time and your education. Peace and love, everyone.